Powered by the Inside the Birds podcast. Now, live from inside the Matt Black Kia Studios. It's Football at 4.
Football at 4 is powered by the Inside the Birds podcast. And it's brought to you by PropSwap, America's sports betting marketplace. Sell your sports bet and take your profit. Find out how at PropSwap.com. Download the PropSwap app today. Andrew DiCecco's here. Our continuing look at the divisions today. We go to the AFC South, which is very interesting, of course, with Carson Wentz residing there. We don't know what's going to happen with the Houston quarterback situation. Trevor Lawrence in Jacksonville, and maybe the best of them all resides in Tennessee. So let's take a look at this interesting division now as Andrew DiCecco's back as we take a look at the AFC South today for today's edition of Football at 4. What's going on, Andrew, man? How you been?
Hey, Mike, I'm doing well. Thanks for asking. How about you?
Yeah, man. Happy 4th, and hopefully you had a great weekend and we're able to kind of recharge the batteries. And, hey, here we go. Football season is here. We've been taking a look at these divisions. This AFC South, kind of intriguing now, obviously, with a new quarterback in Indianapolis. You've got the Tennessee Titans who have really bulked up, Jacksonville with the first pick in the draft, and then there's Houston. So let's start with them because, quite frankly, we don't know a whole heck of a lot about what they're going to look like because if Deshaun Watson is not there, this team could be in the running for worst team in football.
Yeah, and they have a first-year head coach in David Culley. He was the Eagles wide receiver coach many years ago under Andy Reid. He sort of presided over the receivers that included Todd Pinkston, James Thrash, and Freddie Mitchell. But nonetheless, he has a work cut out for him, David Culley, and he does have an experienced defensive coordinator in Lovie Smith. But I mean, like you said, there's a lot of uncertainty surrounding the quarterback position. But they do have some fast weapons in Brandon Cooks, and they have Andre Roberts, who's a good punt returner, and Randall Cobb. Larry Tunsil's there at left tackle. They have some pieces there. Titus Howard, of course, at right tackle. So they have some young pieces there on the offensive line, but I mean, when you look at the Deshaun Watson situation, you just don't know how that's going to play out. And the thing with that is they don't have a formidable option behind him. Tyrod Taylor is a guy that's played all right in Spurs, but he's not consistent enough to really carry an elevated offense, especially when you're looking at some of the heavyweights in that division, such as the Indianapolis Colts and the Tennessee Titans. So we'll see what happens there, but it doesn't look too promising on the surface.
Yeah, David Johnson, who obviously was a great player a couple of years ago, has really fallen off in recent years. Brandon Cooks, Randall Cobb. Seems like they have some decent weapons at that spot. You mentioned the offensive line. So if Watson plays, if he is able to play and he's out there, what kind of offense do we see this Texans team having?
Well, I think it'll be a middling offense. And the reason why I say that is there's no as good as upgraded as the pieces are around Deshaun Watson, they don't have that top flight receiver. They have a lot of smaller, quicker, shiftier receivers, but they don't have that bona fide big go up and get it type of wide out there. Nico Collins is somebody who they drafted out of Michigan in the 3rd round, but he's still going to take a little bit of time to get acclimated to the NFL level. He may end up ultimately being that guy, but they don't really have that. Week one, I would say. But like you said, the running game is going to be really interesting because you have David Johnson there, Mark Ingram's there as well. They can have a little two-headed monster approach, take a little bit of pressure off of Deshaun Watson and the passing attack. So, I mean, I think it'll be middling offense, but I also think it's going to be one that's going to be maddeningly frustrating each week because I think they're going to sort of spoil a lot of opportunities, and there's going to be a lot of stalled drives due to sort of overall inefficiency.
Yeah, you mentioned Mark Ingram. They also added Phillip Lindsay and Rex Burkhead as well. So they do have some nice running back options on this team. So it'll be interesting to see what that offense looks like. Defensively, they lost J.J. Watt. This is a team that was a very good defensive team. They've kind of gotten older, and it seems that they have taken some steps back on the defensive side of the ball.
Yeah, they had a one of the top defenses in football. It seems like it was not, but they're going through a sort of a growing process there with a lot of younger players like Charles Omenihu, a player who I really liked over Sharif Miller when the Eagles drafted him. Charles Omenihu was still on the board, but nonetheless, he's sort of settled into a nice role there, contributor for the Texans. So he's a player that I really like on that defensive line. Whitney Merciless is still there. Kamau Grugier-Hill is an interesting addition that they have there. Again, one of those pass defending linebackers, a little bit undersized, but very much in the mold of today's NFL defenders that you really need for that second level. The secondary is something that's a big question mark to me because I'm not really sold on Lonnie Johnson as in the safety, and they have Vernon Hargraves has been sort of a guy that's bounced around a little bit. He never really lived up to his first-round billing. Bradley Roby's there. I like Bradley Roby, but I think he's a corner that takes a lot of chances and often gets it often bites him, and it bites him and hamstrings the defense because I think he takes a lot of chances and goes after the football, but doesn't necessarily have the long speed to make up for that. So, I mean, they have some players there, but ultimately it's not going to be consistent enough to get it done.
All right, head over to Jacksonville in the South where they had the number one pick for a reason. They were the worst team in football. They land up with what some people look at as a generational player in Trevor Lawrence. So let's start there. Has their quarterback situation been fixed? We've heard tank for Tua, and, he didn't turn that franchise around. Is Lawrence a difference maker for this Jacksonville team?
Yeah, I think so. And there's pieces around him there for him to be successful in the early goings, right? I mean, they have Marvin Jones as a veteran receiver, very underrated wide receiver. I thought he did a lot of good things there with the Detroit Lions and, of course, with the Bengals. When there was less of a spotlight on him, I thought he was very consistent there. So they're going to have him. They have DJ Chark. They have Laviska Shenault, a player who is a very versatile weapon when healthy. Health is going to be paramount with him, obviously, because he missed some time at Colorado, and then last season he was banged up a little bit as well. But I think that he has some game-breaking ability there. And then I love their running game. I mean, how can you not like Travis Etienne and James Robinson, who was one of the better stories to come out of the 2020 season. So, I mean, he's going to have a lot of guys that he can work with. Outside of that, they really struggle at the tight end area. They really haven't found any stability there at that position. So when I say outside of that, Mike, have a lot of pieces to work with for Trevor Lawrence.
That should be fun, just kind of watching him, see what kind of NFL player he kind of evolves into. Defensively, this was a team that went to the AFC Championship game a couple of years ago based on that defense. They have fallen on some hard times there. They do have some interesting names on that defense, but I would imagine that their defense, again, is going to struggle.
Yeah, they're going to struggle a little bit, but, again, a very young defense. I think they're sort of on the up and up. Where I look at Josh Allen, the pass rusher from Kentucky, he's an ascending player. I think that he has double-digit sack ability there. Taven Bryan has not quite lived up to his billing, and he's been a bit of a disappointment now. Very inconsistent player down to down, but he's going to be right there in the middle of the defensive line, their first-round pick from 2018. Jihad Ward is somebody who they added, I believe. He's a local guy. Miles Jack, Joe Schobert they still have there. Remember, they gave up a lot to get Joe Schobert, and he's in the middle, their middle linebacker, of course, a very physical presence there. Their secondary, to me, is a little bit puzzling in how that's going to sort of be configured because Trey Herndon is another, I think that he could be upgraded from their corner there. And then they have Shaquille Griffin, of course, and C.J. Henderson. So they have a few corners there. I think C.J. Henderson is going to really elevate his game this season. But as far as his supporting cast, I think Rudy Ford, when they signed him, I think he's on top of their depth chart, I believe. Now, they did drop Andre Sisco, the safety from Syracuse, in the third round, and they added Tyson Campbell, the corner. Remember, he played with Eric Stokes at Georgia, so they added him in the second round as well. So they do have some young players that are worth developing there, and that could very well factor into the starting rotation. But as of right now, I think C.J. Henderson is the only thing that they have to bank on right now.
All right, let's go over to Tennessee. A lot of people are excited about this team, the Titans, Ryan Tannehill, the quarterback, Derrick Henry. You wonder when Henry is going to have that DeMarco Murray type of moment where he goes from just cranking out yards to just kind of falling off. Do you feel like that is coming soon for Henry, or does he still have big-time yardage years still in the tank?
Yeah, I don't see it happening this year. I don't think that regression is going to sort of transpire this season. I think if you're a fantasy football fan, you can make an argument that he should be the top one or two selections there. He's up there with Christian McCaffrey. I think just based on volume alone and his red zone production, he's going to be the sort of engine that drives that steers that offense, I think. And we added Julio Jones, you have A.J. Brown. Josh Reynolds is a very underrated signing as a slot receiver there. He was productive in his time when he saw increased snaps with the Rams. And then we mentioned the running backs that are there, and it's also going to be, can Ryan Tannehill, does he have it in him to be that quarterback that can elevate the offense and take advantage of the skill players that he has at his disposal?
All right, defensively, or excuse me, let's stay on the offense here because you mentioned Julio Jones is there now with Derrick Henry, A.J. Brown, another big-time player. This is an offense, Josh Reynolds, too, they added as well. This is an offense that can be a lot more dynamic than the ones they've had the last couple of years.
Yeah, and to me, that's always been their problem. They never really had a bona fide top pass catcher that you can force feed targets to that's going to be a go-to guy in critical moments. They never really had that. I think another player on their offense who we haven't mentioned that is poised to emerge this season is their tight end, Anthony Firkser. Of course, John Smith is no longer there. I think Anthony Firkser is going to be a player that can sort of be a security blanket over the middle. I think he can stretch teams vertically. I think he's mobile. I think he's also athletic enough to get vertical and be a more and they can do some things with him as well. So they have a number of weapons they can work with, and they really haven't had that to go off of. They've always had that stout defense in the running game, but now all of a sudden you have a pretty impressive aerial attack.
Defensively, I think when people think of the Titans, because of Vrabel, they think defense. They got some pretty interesting names on that defense of Jaylen Brown, Bud Dupree, Byard in the backfield. Hooker is back there as well. Caleb Farley they brought in. So Jenkins is the other corner. This is a defense that should be better because I think we thought of them as defensively, but they did not live up to what they were supposed to be defensively last year.
No, and I think ultimately the biggest hamstring for them, the biggest detriment that held them back was that they didn't have a consistent pass rush. And now I think they've addressed that in the offseason. That's what really set other teams apart from the Titans. And people say, what were the Titans really lacking? They seem to have it all. Well, it was a consistent pass rush, and they added Bud Dupree to pair with Harold Landry's there. Rashaan Evans is a fantastic linebacker. Jeffrey Simmons on the defensive line is a player that really, when he was drafted, he was coming off an injury, but he really just stepped right in and started playing seamlessly and became one of the better defenders, the defensive trenchmen in the NFL. So, they have guys there in the first and second level. Caleb Farley's there. Caleb Farley's a player that you and I mentioned at length as being someone that could be boom or bust because he just seems to be a snake-bitten player, but nobody's ever doubted his athleticism or his ability to go get the football and be a dynamic player in the back end. So I think if they're able to do that, they really haven't had that type of player. If they're able to do that, they're going to be just fine. Janoris Jenkins is also there. Elijah Molden is the player who I spoke about at length in the draft process as being a positionless defender that can play corner, safety, slot. He can do whatever. Very physical. Reminds me of a honey dog in many regards. So I think that they're going to be well staffed in that area as well.
Andrew DiCecco, football at 4. We're looking at the AFC South, and we're going to head over to the final team in the division, Indianapolis, who obviously made the big deal to get Carson Wentz. So let's start with Wentz and how he fits in with Indianapolis. Jonathan Taylor, Marlon Mack, Nyheim Hines. They got a good running trio. T.Y. Hilton, Michael Pittman, Paris Campbell. It's a good, not great wide receiving core. Mo Alley Cox, pretty good. Jack Doyle. They maybe have the best offensive line in football. So how does Wentz engineer this offense?
Well, pairing him with Frank Reich is certainly going to be to his benefit. They're going to be able to customize the offense based on what Carson Wentz likes and what he's struggled at this point in his career. The fan base there is going to be a little bit easier on him. I think being the everyday scrutiny from the Philadelphia fan base wears on a kid from North Dakota. I'm certainly not making an excuse. It's the NFL. You're getting paid to do a job. But I think that's going to sort of make his transition to the Colts a little bit more seamless. Now, there's plenty of weapons there, and the offensive line is there, so the excuses now have run out for Carson Wentz. He's going to have he has a receiver that can go up and get the football in the red zone, and Michael Pittman. I think he's going to take a big step forward this season. You have your speed vertical guys and T.Y. Hilton and Paris Campbell. Let's not forget Paris Campbell has blazing speed. He just has not been able to stay healthy and be on the field. Zach Pascal is a terrific possession receiver as well. So he has a lot of different receivers that can do a multitude of different things for the offense. They have a pair of tight ends that he can use in Mo Alley Cox and Jack Doyle. They both bring different elements to their game. So, and you have the running game. You have the pass-catching running back, Nyheim Hines, to really fall back on. And Jonathan Taylor, who can be a workhorse running back. So, they really do have they're in position for him to be successful. Now you really have to see, does he have what it takes? Because now there's no more, yeah, but the offensive line wasn't good. There's no more, yeah, but who's he throwing to? Now you got to step up and be the guy because the pieces there for you to be successful.
Yeah, the big thing too, though, as we kind of hinted at, their offensive line much better than what he's played behind, at least last year.
Sure.
They have a very good offensive line, which is funny because all those years Luck was there. One of the reasons he left early and retired is because their line was terrible, and now it's one of the best.
Right. Yeah, and that was the biggest thing that held that team back. I think was their offensive line, and you saw what it did. You mentioned Andrew Luck as a great example. I mean, Deshaun Watson's been victimized by a poor offensive line as well. So, I mean, we talked about Joe Burrow last time. You have to protect your franchise quarterbacks because you don't know how long they're willing to hang in there and take that abuse.
Defensively, this is Jonathan Gannon, who was the secondary coach. He's now in Philadelphia. But their defense was one of the strengths, and their secondary very good. But Kwity Paye, they brought him in. DeForest Buckner, they made that big trade last year. Darius Leonard, very good linebacker, good secondary out there. This feels like a team that has some pretty high expectations. It's one of the more well-rounded teams.
Yeah, and Grover Stewart is a phenomenal player that doesn't get nearly the amount of recognition that he deserves. He's been a really steady player, their nose tackle. You've mentioned Kwity Paye, of course. Kwity Paye was a player that we mentioned on this show as being a steady, strong, powerful edge rusher. I don't know if he'll ever be a double-digit sack guy, but I think that he's going to be a force and a presence against the run. And he has players around him to sort of complement his skill set. And DeForest Buckner, of course, who you mentioned. Robert Windsor, I think the former Penn State Nittany Lions there as well, if I remember correctly. I believe they drafted him last year. And he's a good rotational interior lineman as well. And then when you look at the linebacking core, Bobby Okariki, in my opinion, is one of the most underrated pass defending linebackers in football. I think he has tremendous sideline-to-sideline speed and range, and he can drop back and cover whether these hybrid tight ends, these running backs that are getting out of the backfield and have that dynamic presence. He can do it all. So I really like him. And then Darius Leonard, I mean, you saw what he's been able to do in his past few seasons in the NFL. He's just been tremendous from South Carolina State. And then when you look at the secondary, you got guys like Rocky Sin, who I think is starting to come into his own. Took a little while, but of course he was their second-round pick in 2019 from Temple. Julian Blackman is another. We mentioned all these underrated players that they have. Well, he's a phenomenal safety that does not get a lot of recognition, but he's starting to come into his own. I think he's going to become a household name this season. Kenny Moore is one of the best nickel defenders in football. So yeah, you mentioned it's just a very well-rounded team. The depth behind them, however, behind the starters is questionable. So health is going to be paramount with this team. They're not especially deep in a lot of areas.
All right, Andrew, this division, Indianapolis, Tennessee, Houston, I guess, and Jacksonville a little off, but it's going to be probably a pretty interesting two-team race. How do you rank the four AFC South teams?
Well, I'm a big Tennessee Titans fan, or Titans proponent this year. I like what they've done to build the roster and construct it. I think they've always been just a piece or two away. They've bolstered their pass rush. So I'm a fan of what they've done. I'm going to put them number one. I think the Colts are ultimately going to go, obviously, as far as what Carson Wentz can take them. But I mean, the other teams are such a distant third and fourth away that I think that I got to slot the Colts at 2. Then I'm going to go Jacksonville. Then I'm going to go Houston Texans.
All right, Andrew DiCecco, our division previews continue on Friday with the AFC West, and then we'll get into the NFC for next week, leading you right up to Eagles training camp. We'll take a look at the AFC West Friday, and then next week on Tuesday when Andrew's back, we'll go back from the NFC West all the way up to the East, and then we will be kicking off our look at the Eagles training camp. Of course, don't forget the Inside the Birds podcast drops on Thursday at 6 a.m. The new one is out. They take a look at the Giants with Greg Cosell. Andrew DiCecco, football at 4. All right, my man, I'll talk to you Friday.
Sounds good, Mike. Have a good week.
You too. There's Andrew DiCecco here on the Sports Bash. Football at 4.